Well, welcome to the Dr. Paul Show. I have the special pleasure of having a guest on that I'm really excited to talk to today. He sent me his book, which was really amazing. This is Dr. Jeffrey D. Morris. I read the book this last week. It's called Just Live, and the subtitle is Simply Take the Next Breath. Fascinating book. By the way, congratulations. It's very well researched. I have my newest book. I have a whole chapter on suicide also, so I've researched the subject a bit. And having over 30 years of clinical experience, and I've unfortunately it's a very heavy subject, and obviously the worst outcome that we can see with the field I'm in, or with anybody out there. So if you could, well, tell me about your history, your education. If you could kind of give us some background about you before we get into
Sure.
the
Just like personal history.
personal history, your education,
Sure.
your where you got to in your career, and then we can go from there.
Okay. Well, I was born in rural Southern Illinois, so right in the middle of the United States, and where we get every extreme of weather, the hottest hots and the coldest colds, and about 2 weeks in between that is kind of nice, and that's about it. So I was born and raised in a little town called McLeansboro, Illinois, very small farming community, coal mining community, about 2,500 people. Spent most of my life there. And had a pretty normal childhood, growing up. And I will probably talk a little bit about that, so I won't get too much into that. Was tried to be an athlete when I was younger, so played a lot of sports. Wasn't much else to do, so uh, ended up playing basketball, going on to college and playing basketball at a junior college and at a small school in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin Superior. Actually got my bachelor's degree from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale and got a job. I was a math teacher and a high school basketball coach. Started working on my master's degree in educational administration to become a principal when I was about 25 and got my master's, ended up getting a job as an assistant principal when I was about 26 or 27 at another rural school close to where I was working in Southern Illinois. And then I just kind of moved around a little bit, got a job in the St. Louis area at a school. My now ex-wife and I moved to St. Louis. She was also an educator. She was a teacher. And so we moved to the St. Louis area and I took another assistant principal's job and worked at a school in Edwardsville, Illinois, which is basically a suburb of St. Louis. And then moved around St. Louis a little bit, worked at another assistant principal's job, and then became a high school principal when I was about in my early 30s. Worked as a principal for about 8 years. And then I left my principal's job, and the last probably 14 years, I had been doing suicide prevention training, teaching a program called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, working in schools throughout the Midwest, mostly in Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa. And that's basically what I've been doing up to the last, probably about a year and a half ago. I stopped doing that, and I'm pretty much retired, other than I bartend a little bit on the side just to get out of the house. So that's basically me in a nutshell.
Great. And you mentioned in your book, I always, with all my patients, I ask them, like, tell me the very beginning. I always ask every new patient about their childhood, growing up. It looks like you have two, I mean, you have two forwards from each of your parents, your mom and your dad. And so they obviously adore you, and it sounds like you had a good upbringing. But many of my patients, as I think was the case with you, find like are right around like middle school is when things start to change. It's a
And
common.
I mean, I think the research shows that about the time kids hit puberty is when suicide rates spike. So 12, 13, middle school age, seventh, eighth grade. And I think that was the case for me. I think I was actually kind of reflecting back today on the first time I remember having thoughts of suicide. And I would say it was whenever I was in a seventh or eighth grader. Um, growing up, my parents were very young when they had me. They were in high school.
Mhm.
So even though my parents divorced when I was very young, they were 23 and 21 when they divorced, and I was, you know, 4 or 5, something like that. And so, but I have very loving parents. Whatever, I adore both of them dearly. I have a wonderful stepdad, and my dad's been married a few more times, but I'm very close to a couple of my stepmoms, and I have a wonderful family. I wouldn't say it's definitely not your typical family tree, but it works for us. And I think that, like I said, the first time I started having um, suicidal ideations was, whenever I was in middle school and early high school. I never really had a plan. I never attempted, but I thought about it. I do remember thinking about it.
Right. Tell me about that. What led to that first attempt, and tell me about what was going on at that time.
Sure. So that was in 1997, and that was kind of a big year for me personally because I was working as an assistant principal in a school district.
Mhm.
And in the spring of that year, I was working on my doctorate, and I had finished what my I was had finished my superintendent certification, and so there was a job opening for assistant superintendent in the district I was working in, and I applied for it, and I just applied for it just to get the experience of interviewing, thinking I didn't have a shot. And I interviewed, and the superintendent, his name was Don Smith. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. He came to me the next day because he was still my boss, and came to my office and shut the door, and he said, "Jeff, I'm just going to shoot straight with you." He said, "Of all the people he interviewed, you had the best interview, and you're not going to get this job just
Hmm.
because of your age." And I was like, I get that. I'm only 27, 28 years old, 29, something like that. So, and about 2 days later, he called me and said, "Well, Jeff, this shows you what I know. They're going to offer you the job." And so I got that. I got a promotion, and about that was probably in like March. In May, my kid's mom and I had our first child, and we ended up buying a house, moved into a house that was bigger than anything I thought I would ever live in. And so we had 3 major events. And I think the main thing that happened was I was working as an assistant superintendent, and I just didn't like the job. I didn't like being isolated, being in an office by myself most of the time, not having the connection to the school. And I think that played a big part of it. And I
Did
tell people
you miss,
that,
did you miss teaching and teaching
stressors
classes? And
stressors can increase suicide risk, even if they're positive stressors. And so I think that even though I had a bunch of good stuff happening, I felt a lot of guilt because I was so depressed. And I'm like, how can I be depressed when I've got a beautiful wife and a beautiful daughter and a great job, and I'm on my way to, becoming a superintendent someday, probably at a really young age. I mean, I shouldn't feel this way. And so it made my depression even worse because I had so many things going positive
Mhm.
for me. And
Right.
so I think that just led to the first time I attempted in October of 97.
And tell me about the attempt. How did you try?
So I tried. I went home over lunch, and I shut my garage door and left my vehicle running, and I was gonna uh, carbon monoxide poisoning. And for some reason, I just started thinking about my kid's mom and my ex-wife, and or my wife at the time, and my daughter, and what it would mean for them to have me gone, and my parents. And I thought about my parents had actually lost. Um, I had an older brother who was born before I was born, who was killed before I was born. So they would have been losing another son. And I was like, for some reason, I just decided I couldn't go through with it.
Right. Um, and tell me about what happened after that then.
Well, I just basically I didn't tell anybody. I didn't. I just went inside, got something to eat, and went back to work, and didn't say a word to anybody about anything that happened.
Mhm.
And I ended up, that's when I got a job in St. Louis because I was thinking that part of my depression was related to not being in a building as a principal, assistant principal. And so my thinking was if I can get back in a building, that will my mental health will be better. And
Mhm.
uh, turned out that was not the case. And for the next about 5 years, I was in and out. I mean, I'm bipolar too, so I'm pretty good at hiding, or I was pretty good at hiding uh, my illness from people because I don't get the real crazy manic. Um, I'm not like spending money I don't have or
Mhm.
making just irrational decisions and going out buying a new car on a whim or
Mhm.
something like that. But I do get the severe depression. So my mania is very subtle. And but I was still dealing with depression, ending up getting I worked in Edwardsville for 2 years and worked as an assistant principal in another school district for 2 years in Missouri. And then I got a principal's job. And again, we had my wife and I had another child in the spring of 2002. We had our son, and then I got offered the principal's job at Edwardsville and the assistant principal's job at this other school district. I ended up taking the assistant principal's job for a variety of reasons. And again, every time I wanted to do something better, I was able to have that choice. And so I had these, and then in the spring of 2002, I got my first principal's job, and I was really looking forward to it. And I again was offered the print at the school I was leaving. They offered me the principal's job there if I would stay, but it was a school of about 2,500 students, and I was really more interested in being in a school of about 700 or 800 kids where I was going to go. And I thought I was in a really good situation. And that's the time that in the fall of that year, that's when I attempted, and my wife at the time knew something was wrong. She took me to the emergency room, and that's when I finally came and said I tried to overdose. And so
On what?
the first time my family found out what I was going through, and they had no idea that I was struggling that bad.
What did you try to overdose on?
Just over the counter sleeping pills.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so, and that's you were hospitalized at that point then?
Yes, I was hospitalized then. I was hospitalized between 2002 and 2010. I was hospitalized, I want to say 4 times,
Hmm.
um, either for suicide attempts or because I was headed that direction. And I think that I finally figured it ended up causing, my ex-wife, she's a great lady. I love her to death. She just got to the point where it was just too much. I mean, it was like having 3 kids. And, and so we got divorced, which that was very difficult for me in the beginning, but, um, I think I figured out what I ended up doing was retiring early through disability through the state of Missouri where I was working. And I felt a lot of guilt about that, but I was like, I got to do something. I can't keep doing this. And um, so I ended up taking early retirement in 2010. I was still able to work. And so that's when I got into doing the suicide prevention work. And I felt like, I'm one of these that like, if I'm going to have this, I may as well make use of it and try to help people.
Hmm.
And so that's what I tried to do was just took that and started working in schools. And I really didn't focus as much. I mean, I talked about what I'd been through, but that wasn't like me going in and telling people my story doesn't necessarily help them that much. And so I focus more on teaching people how to help somebody. I don't know if you're familiar with QPR, but the way QPR works is it stands for question, persuade, refer.
Hmm.
What you're doing is teaching people how to help somebody that they think is suicidal.
Hmm.
And through a process called question, persuade, refer. You ask them if they're suicidal, you persuade them to let you help you, and then you refer them to specialists to get through doctors and counselors and take them to the hospital.
Hmm.
And that's the training right there.
Is that
So I
similar to what
put
they
that
do?
in about 50 minutes.
Is that what they similar what they do with like suicide prevention hotlines? Is that what they
Yeah,
typically do?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and then going back to quickly about bipolar 2. So bipolar 2 basically is hypomania with depression. So the
Yeah,
hypomania is a very functional state. People have a high energy. You don't need that much sleep, and you function great without that much sleep. But a lot of people like that state because you're productive, you
it
feel
feels good.
feels great, but the problem is it doesn't last, and then you crash. And most of, and I talked about this on the show before, most bipolar disorder is not mania or hypomania, it's depression. Depression and the depression you get versus a major depressive disorder we call unipolar disorder is that it's a darker and deeper depression. And in my experience, it's suicidal risk is definitely higher with bipolar than unipolar disorder, any type, because of the fact that the highs and lows, the ups and downs, and the crashing and the despair, and so yeah, so it's definitely a higher risk. I mean, we do see suicidal thinking with people who have no bipolar traits at all, but if you do have the bipolar traits, it's actually a higher risk too.
Right.
Um, So I'm going to be referring to a few notes, so excuse the audience, but I started looking. I took a bunch of notes here because it's a bunch of topics I want to cover.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about the chapter called "Learning from My Mistakes."
Sure.
It's a long chapter, but if you can cover some ground in there about some of the things you talk about in that chapter. And
Yeah, it's funny because after we just decided to you and thank you again for doing this. I was like, I probably need to go back and reread my book because I haven't read it in quite some time. Uh, so I'll start kind of at the beginning. For me, my book kind of came from the idea that I'd kind of thought about writing it. And so I kind of took my own personal experiences with dealing with mental illness, what I've taught and learned about suicide and suicide prevention. And then I just finished my doctorate, and my research was on suicide prevention amongst African Americans, high school students.
wow.
And so I kind of took all of that and thought, that's what I want to kind of focus on. And the idea I had was I really wanted to write a book that was very short, which this is. It's 90 pages, and the kind of book that somebody can read in a couple hours. They go to the pool and they sit down, and it's easy to read in one setting. And a year from now, after they've read the book, they think of something that they remember from the book. Well, they don't have very far to go to find it because it's such a short book that referring back to it, they're not looking through 300 or 400 pages. It's just a very short read. So I started with the idea that I wanted to help people learn from what I've learned. And the learning from my mistakes was essentially my what I've learned and how I've been able to change the way I approach my having a mental illness.
Mhm.
And for example, a big mistake I used to make was, being having the bipolar 2, I would have the subtle highs, the hypomania, and then I get really low. And when I would come out of a depression, I can remember thinking to myself, okay, Jeff, I'm never going to let myself get depressed again.
Mm.
And a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, 2 weeks, whatever would come by and I'd get depressed again and I'd feel even worse. And sometime in about, there was a period where I moved to Iowa for a few years when my kids moved there. And I remember thinking, I've got to change the way I'm looking at my life. I've got to, and it was kind of related to moving to Iowa. I knew I was going to be there 6 years because my son was going to graduate in 2018. And I'd been up there about 2 years. And I was like, I've got to stop counting the days and just meet people and make friends and enjoy Iowa as best I can.
Mhm.
And it kind of hit me that I needed to stop trying to not be depressed. From the standpoint that I knew I was going to get depressed sometimes, and rather focus on, Jeff, you've been depressed before. When it happens, you're going to come out of it, and it may last 2 or 3 days. No sense in getting all worked up about it. You know how to deal with it. And when you'll start feeling better and things will be okay. And when I did that, that was probably the biggest change that I made in how I deal with my depression. Now, I'm not going to say I've perfected it. I haven't. This past year has been very difficult for me because I've had some physical health issues and some other family stuff that has affected me a little bit. So I've dealt with probably some more depression in the last year than I have in a long time. But it still helped me get through those times, knowing that I was going to eventually feel better and come out of it. And so
Mhm.
that was the biggest thing. The biggest reason I wrote that chapter was just trying to help people learn about, focus on management versus curing your mental illness.
You mentioned management versus care, um, and yeah, that's some of the stuff you were covering in your book. Let me see here. Also, you said you have a section called "Stop Worrying." uh,
Yeah. 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 I mean, I come from a long line of warriors on my mom's side of the family. Um, and my mom and my grandmother, my mom's mom, were well, my grandmother was, and my mom still is a professional warrior. And I used to worry about things all the time, and I would worry about things that probably weren't even going to happen, or I would worry about things that I knew were going to happen, and I was like, why am I worrying about something that I can't stop?
right.
And so I really changed my approach to be like, I would just ask myself, okay, Jeff, what is this situation? Can I do anything about it? If I can, then do something about it. If I
Right.
can't, then you got to move on. You're just going to have to deal with it. And so, it's I think it's unreasonable to say don't worry. I mean, I've got two kids who I worry about sometimes, but I don't fixate on it too much. And if I start worrying about something with my daughter, if I need to, I'll just call her and ask her how she's doing. And that kind of puts me at ease that, I'm just a dad checking on you and making sure things okay because they're both, still pretty young and kind of moving out on their own and getting their first jobs and first relationships, serious relationships and stuff like that. So, that's what I meant by that when I talked about, trying to stop worrying so much.
And I think you mentioned in the book, and I talk to patients about this a lot too. Everyone has stress. There's not one person that doesn't get stressed about
Yeah,
something. We all worry about certain things. We all get a little bit down at times when things happen, and obviously when there's a death of a close loved one, a pet. I'm a cat fanatic, and so when I lose a cat, it's always difficult for me.
yeah,
Um, and so, but there's a difference between that and a clinical condition where it's not just a passing thoughts. It's more of a pervasive, persistent issue. Uh,
right.
and there's a difference between the two. But yeah, but I tell my patients, look for those kind of things, exercise, learn mindfulness, learn how to, like you mentioned, mindfulness in your book, which is great.
Yeah,
I have my pastor, he's very into what we call contemplative prayer. And he, about how to learn how to relax your mind, your body, and meditation, yoga, whatever works for people. And you mentioned in here like self-care and the importance of self-care. And you also mentioned that having a support plan also. So maybe people you can call, when you have these thoughts. And is that what you mean by that?
yeah. So what I did was I mean I first time I ever wrote it down was when I wrote it down for the book was having my own support plan and I have like 6 steps and it's very simple. Um, but my first plan is just to call people. I have people that I can talk to who can check on me um, and I tell my parents, when I'm feeling bad, I'll tell them because I text my parents almost daily, and I'll let them know, I'm not feeling great, and so they know that means they can still check on me, but don't expect a reply back or real quick. And even my own kids, I tell a story about in the book where I was laying on my couch and not feeling great, a little depressed. My son was living with me, and he was on his way to work, and he said, "Dad, you doing okay?" And I said, "Well, Quinn, not feeling the greatest, but I'm okay. And he said, do you take your medication? And I said, yeah, I take my medication every day. And he said, okay, that's when, and to me, that was such a great thing. And I told him later how much that meant to me, for him to just do that simple little thing. And so, that's an important thing for people is being able to treat your illness as something that's normal.
Right.
Um, you know, like taking your insulin as a diabetic or having an inhaler as an asthma, patient. And so just the normalcy of it for me
Hmm.
makes it, I don't have a sign around my neck saying I'm depressed all the time,
Right.
but the people who are close to me know what I deal with.
Right.
And they kind of know when it's time to let Jeff needs a couple of days, just kind of veg out a little bit. He's probably not going to be his normal self and he'll come out of it. And so, I had a situation probably 2 years ago where it was like winter time can be kind of rough, and I was just feeling bad, and I just got up, grabbed my dogs, and went to my dad's house, and walked in. And I said, Dad, I'm staying the night here, and he was like, okay. And I was really feeling just really down, and uh, stayed there with him. And next morning we had breakfast, and I said, okay, I'm ready to go home. And he's like, you sure? I was like, no, I'm fine. That's all I needed. Just
Yeah.
a little pep talk, and
Yeah.
really, I tell people all the time, it's not really what you say to somebody, it's just being there and being willing to listen. That's the most important thing you can do. And even if you tell them, I have no idea what you go through, I don't know what I can do to help you, but I'm willing to sit here and let you talk to me as long as you need.
Yeah, with every new patient, I always ask, any thoughts of hurting yourself? Did that ever happen in the past? I always find that out. And then any patients who are maybe not totally stable, I always ask them, and then I do what we call a verbal contract. And basically, I just say, look, while you're under my care, let's make a deal. Please don't attempt. And if you're thinking of attempting, please call me. Now,
Yeah.
I'm a strange doctor because I return every phone call every day, same day, no matter what. So I say, if you need to talk to me, I'm here. Okay, call me.
Yeah.
Or I
Great.
said, or someone you trust. I mean, your mom, your sister, brother, whatever. Someone you trust to talk to and tell them what you're feeling. And it's it's really important to talk about it and bring it up. And sometimes when you
That,
talk about it, with somebody, it really really helps. And it's also refreshing to hear you talk about medications because it's the eternal struggle with doing psychiatry is getting people to understand the role of medications and that look, they're not your enemy. And people, I'm not a pill person. I go, okay, I get it, but and I use the example of diabetes. I said, but if you're diabetic and you needed insulin, you take it, right? If you had a low thyroid and you had to take a thyroid supplement or heart medication, would you take it? Well, yeah, because so this is medical. It's chemical. It's a genetic issue. Well, we'll get into that, but I mean, it's basically mostly a genetic issue. So it runs in families. So I'm not sure about your family history. I know your mom was a worrier, but is there any bipolar in your family or any depression
no, don't know about bipolar. I mean,
that you know of?
that I know of. I mean, I think there probably is some history
Mm,
because there's some history of addiction. So I would imagine that some family members I know that struggled with addiction were probably self-medicating.
exactly.
You know, we're talking people the generation before me, taking, especially men, just weren't going to ask. They weren't going to ask for help. They just weren't going to do
Right.
it. That wasn't a
Right.
common.
Well, that's the family history we just said. Because when I get a family history, I get really detailed with people. Tell me about your mom, your dad, your uncles and aunts, your grandparents. A lot of in the past, a lot of like alcoholism and addiction, but that was self-medicating, like you just said. And so that's the history. And then the second factor is hormonal changes. That's where puberty comes in. That's why it starts in puberty often. It's rare, like you said in the book. It's rare in a younger child. It does happen, but it's rare. And then other times of hormonal change would be premenstrual for women, postpartum
Right.
for women, and men and women. I call menopause for men in the midlife, and for menopause with women. So those are the two main factors, and trauma. So if someone's exposed to extreme trauma, that also plays a factor in that, like PTSD and things like that. But yeah, but it's really refreshing to hear you talk about medications because they are extremely important. And I go over with patients here. Look, here's what medications do. I do drawings of neurons. I say your chemical balance is off. This is what medications are going to balance these chemicals. So I kind of get on paper, and so it shows them on paper, because we can't do blood tests to do this. We have to do it by listening to people and getting a good idea. So, you need to find a good doctor, obviously, who knows they know what they're doing. And you mentioned a good counselor, a therapist is very vital too. But I think medications are very underappreciated. And you mentioned in your book, which is true, most people who attempt to commit suicide are not being treated. There's a myth out there, and this has been perpetuated for quite some time, that antidepressants increase suicidal risk. That's not really the case. It's actually the opposite. They decrease the risk. Now, the exception can be if the doctor is misdiagnosing, and let's say it's a bipolar 1 patient who's really depressed, but they don't get a history of the mania. And then they give someone an antidepressant that sets them into mania and they get unstable, but that's more of a misdiagnosis. So if someone has depression, even with bipolar 2, it still means antidepressants are helpful. You might also often be on a mood stabilizer, which is also
That's
usually,
what I'm on. I'm
yeah.
on two antidepressants and a mood stabilizer, and I've been on that regimen for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's usually when my patients, one or two antidepressants, one or two mood stabilizers. That combination, it can keep people really stable when you get the dosing right. But people have to give the doctor time. It's like, look, it's not a quick fix here. I got to figure out the dosing. I got to titrate. I only do one medication at a time. So it's a process. It takes
Yeah.
a little bit of time to
It's
get the mix.
frustrating, and I understand that, and I think I said that in the book that you know it, you've got to communicate with your doctor about how it makes you feel. If
Right.
there's something you don't like about it, there's lots of options out there for mood stabilizers, antidepressants,
Hmm.
um, and your doctor will listen to you, but they can't make changes if you don't
Right.
communicate it to them. And you can't, like, you just don't want to give up the first, few months you're dealing with this. I mean, it took me a long time. Took me a long time to find a good psychiatrist,
Hmm.
and then the other thing that people deal with that they don't understand is psychiatrists typically are not counselors. I was like that. I mean, they do a little bit of that, but I said, if you want an actual counselor, someone to talk to at length, you need to find a psychologist and someone like that to fit with you and deal with the balance between
Hmm.
talking about what you're going through versus medicating, getting medication.
Right.
And so, and even that's, like for some reason, I think because I was raised by my mom, I lived with my mom growing up, I feel much more comfortable talking to women when
Hmm.
it comes to um, subtype of counseling setting. And so I've always been that way. So if I have a counselor, I'm gonna ask for a female.
Right.
I don't know why that is, but I just feel more comfortable talking to someone
Mhm.
like that who's female. My psychiatrist is a guy, and that isn't an issue for me. But I know it's a frustrating thing, and I've had this conversation with lots of people. One of my best friends, his son, has struggled with some of this stuff, and I've told him, and he's very quiet and reserved, and I'm like, Brendan, you gotta talk about what you're going through. I mean, you just have to do it because they can't read your mind.
Right. Yeah, and I'm like I said, I do things differently. A lot of doctors, well, let's do this. It'll take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks to work. I'll see you back in 3 months. So there's a lot of that going on in psychiatry, which I completely disagree with that. What I do with my patients, every new patient, I say, call me in a week, no matter what. Call me in a week. Let me know how the first week goes because I can tell because I work very quickly with medications. I don't sit around and titrate super slowly and I don't do that, and it's very unusual for doctors to get back to you quickly like I do. But I say call me in a week, and what that does is that opens up that line of communications. They know that they can get a hold of me. They know I care, and I want to know because within the first week I can tell right away if the medication I chose is correct or not. If it's correct, great. I might titrate a little bit more before I see him again. I might, okay, let's switch to this instead. I don't think this is the right one for you. But when I say working quickly, I mean people should be getting better within a week or two into a month or two at the latest. So
Yeah.
if it's taking months and months, we don't have that. People don't have that kind of time. Someone who's potentially suicidal doesn't have the patience and time to be waiting months and months for to get better. And so I think a lot of doctors work way too slowly. They don't follow up quickly enough, and they don't, and I do a lot of in between phone calls. I don't charge people for it. I just say, I'm not an attorney. I don't charge my time on the phone. But I tell them, let's to get this right, we need to communicate. Call me this week and call me in 2 weeks. And I still have appointments, but I try to like move quickly to get people better because I know that, to get people better and especially decrease the risk of suicide, I need to get people better quickly.
Yeah.
Uh, so, anyway, so then I also want to talk about you mentioned here about you said why people commit suicide. With
Sure.
the reason why. Like, can you touch on that?
Yeah. So that's one of the questions I get asked a lot. Is especially when why would somebody do that? Why? And when I do training, with students and adults, it's one of the questions I ask is why do you all think someone would die from suicide, and why would they attempt? And it's usually the typical answers. They're depressed or they're upset about something, or there's a litany of reasons that you can come up with, hundreds of them. And then what I tell them is that those are all valid reasons, but there are also things that lots of people experience and don't attempt suicide. And what it really comes down to, what the research I've read is, it's just a matter of the person is in so much pain that they just don't know what else to do, and the pain becomes so great. And I think the author that I'm most familiar with is Thomas Joyner. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he uh, he has a really great book on talks a lot about that, about why people die from suicide. And it really just boils down to that one thing, that uh, whatever the reason is, the person is just in so much pain, they just don't know what else to do to stop it.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't understand it. I mean, there's a lot of examples. You touch on Robin Williams in your book, which is an example of someone that people would never expect. Famous, everyone loves him, an entertainer. He's always seems so happy and up. But he had a drug addiction issues. I suspect, by just observing him, he's bipolar.
Oh, he
Uh,
was definitely bipolar. I think
yeah,
he was diagnosed.
yeah. I never heard of the former life. Like, as a clinician, I can definitely see that. I knew he was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia at the end, and but people would say, well, why would he do it? He has everything you would want in life, and it doesn't make any sense. So when it doesn't make sense, it's because people don't realize it does. It's not about what you have or how famous you are. It's about the fact that you're in so much pain that seems like the solution. There's another one. I don't know if you've heard of Twitch before. His
What was it?
name is Twitch. He's a dancer. So he was on So You Think You Can Dance, a TV show. He got really well known. His nickname is Twitch.
Oh,
And
yes, yes.
yeah,
He,
and then
he was Ellen DeGeneres's.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he one night he left the home, and he left the car and everything. And his wife called the police and said this isn't like him. He went to a hotel room and checked into a cheap hotel room and killed himself. And my son, when he heard, he was upset. He said, I'm pissed off at him. And I go, Logan. He goes, he left two young kids. I go, Logan, you don't understand. That's depression. I said, when it's severe, I said, it doesn't matter sometimes what you even though you would think about your kids, think about what the people are leaving behind, how much hurt it would, even that sometimes is not enough. And a couple of recent things, I just heard a few days ago, a patient of mine said at a local high school here, just finishing his junior year of high school, a star football player, had a girlfriend. She said he was the nicest kid, really great kid. He was well beloved. He took his car and he drove as fast as he could, and he ran into a barrier and killed himself. And my son's actually a full-time plumber. He has a college degree, and he went into plumbing. He loves plumbing. And a guy, a plumber he was close to, and they were all close to him. He was a great kid, and he a couple weeks ago he shot himself in the head. and my son was just broken up about it, and he was trying to. And I'm just thinking about it. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit, but he said I don't get it because he was with one of the other guys the day before fishing, and he seemed like he was in a good mood, and I said, well, sometimes, people can be like in a mood because and I think you touched on in the book that because they know they're going to do it and they're finally at peace knowing that I'm going to finally get this done and I'm not going to think about it anymore. I'm just going to do it now. And so
I
sometimes you
mean, I
feel,
know that's the way I felt. Was I almost felt at peace because I knew the pain was going to be over within the next day or two, and I always give the example that uh, suicide is like lots of other illnesses. If somebody dies of a heart attack, it happens to people who are rich and poor and in between, and it's just like that. And even the having a lot of what I tell people is, and I kind of experienced this myself, not that I'm as successful or wealthy or anything as Robin Williams and other famous people, but when you have a lot of good things and what people perceive as stuff and success and a fairy tale life, that can actually make you feel worse about your depression because you're asking yourself, how can I be so depressed when I've got everything? I've got money, I've got fame, I've got all this stuff. I'm good looking or whatever, and I'm wanting to kill myself. That doesn't that and so that just it builds on itself and it makes people feel even worse about their situation.
and you also mentioned in a chapter about, what suicide does to the people left behind. And I agree with you about in my experience also that it's the most difficult death that any family members, friends can experience. I mean, it can, even more than cancer or heart attacks or sudden death or accidents or whatever. Because I think people feel like I should have seen it, I should have done something. I had
Right.
a patient last year. I talked to her, and she said that her dad lives in the Midwest somewhere, and she's in California, like where I'm at, and she said every week I call my dad. See, and then she said this one time I don't know, he just didn't sound quite right. And I said, Dad, are you okay? He's like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. And she said, okay. And she said, and a few days later, he killed himself. And she said the guilt she felt about I should have known something. I go, how would you know that? She goes, well, because something wasn't right. I go, oh, say, okay, something doesn't sound right. So what, you're going to fly to Iowa or wherever he was at? You're going to fly there and see him because I said, no. So I'm trying to get rid of the guilt she was feeling. I said, this is nothing you did. He was planning it ahead. He knew he was going to do it. And there's nothing you could have done. And yes, I mean, but she said, well, but I can't get out of my mind the fact that I knew something was wrong and now I should have done something. And so, and I think that's a lot what people are left behind, just are tortured by that, and that that I should have prevented it. There's something I should have done, and that's but I've never seen anything like suicide as far as the people left behind, like you said in the book.
Yeah, I agree. It's the one time that when you lose somebody that people tend to blame themselves or as you said, think about what they could have done differently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always give the example, like someone will say, I should have known, but I didn't. And I said, well, if they would have died by a heart attack and you didn't know they had a heart condition, would you blame yourself for that? And
Right.
obviously the answer is no. And I said, well, this is the same thing. You can't do something about and help somebody that you don't know is struggling. And even in situations where I've dealt with, I tell a story in the book about a student that I worked with who died from suicide, and his parents did know. I had helped him, and his
Right.
parents were doing everything they should, and they still end up dying by a gunshot wound. And I told them, I said, you guys did everything right. Your son was just too sick. And I said, and I think they were able to accept that because,
Mm-hmm.
and they've, I think, dealt with it about as well as they could because, sometimes people are just too sick to survive the illness that they're going through, and mental illness is the same way.
You also touched about myths about suicide, which is really interesting. People think that it's a selfish act, or touch on the myths that you mentioned about talking about in the book.
Yeah, again, that's a whole, if people want to, there's a really great book by Thomas Joyner. Trying to find the chapter here, but Dr. Joyner wrote a book that is called Myths About Suicide.
Hmm.
And I'm going to turn to the page here just so I am correct about what I'm talking about. Um, but there are lots of things that people think that are true. Like I think you just mentioned it, like that suicide is a selfish act or it's an act of cowardice. Um, it's just an illness is all it is. It's not. And in fact, some people think that they're being unselfish, like I know I felt like I was a burden on people. And so I felt like if I was gone, that that would be a good thing for my family and everybody, so they wouldn't have to deal with the stuff I was going through anymore. I wouldn't be a burden on them anymore. Um, and some people think suicide's not preventable, and I'm like, it absolutely is preventable. Even people that don't know anything, you don't have to be a counselor to help prevent a suicide.
Hmm.
Just stay with the person and be willing to listen. And talk to them and try to help them get the help they need. And so there's lots of things uh, you know, that people think are true about suicide and suicide attempts that aren't accurate.
And I think of the comment, I mean, I'm a Christian, and I think a lot of people think that, oh, he committed suicide, he's going to hell.
Yeah,
And I talked to my pastor about this, and he goes, he disagrees. He said there's nothing biblical about that at all. He said that that's another myth, really. I think if someone's a believer, you believe, look, God understands where you're at. So I think that's another common myth that we have a pastor here, Rick Warren, who is very well known pastor here in Saddleback Church, a very huge church, mega church, and his son committed suicide and years ago, and it really made the news, and people didn't understand how could a pastor's son do that, so yeah, that's a lot of that kind of going on. And you also mentioned here about what to say to someone who, what are the things you say to someone who you touched on that already about questioning them, but what are the things the best thing to say to someone who's considering?
I mean, I think just giving them positive uh, feedback, that you're not going to leave them
Hmm.
and that isn't their fault. How they're, tell them it's okay. How you're feeling is we're going to help you get the help you need.
Hmm.
And and again, back to, I think the most important thing isn't what you say, it's letting them talk
Hmm.
and being willing to listen. And the example I give for that is, all of us have had times when we just have felt bad, not suicidal, but just having a bad day or in a bad mood,
Hmm.
and just being able to talk to somebody about what we were feeling helped us feel better, getting it off our chest. And that person probably didn't do anything but listen. They didn't solve the problem. The problem was still there or whatever it was. But just having someone to talk to and get how you're feeling off your chest uh, is an enormous step to feeling better. And I know personally, when I was first dealing with this and going, like, being diagnosed and having my family know what I was going through was a huge burden for me that was lifted, because I kept that all inside and I don't do that anymore. And so it's such a nice feeling to be able to, I mean, lots of my friends have read my book and almost everybody says the same thing. They either say they've dealt with mental illness themselves or somebody close to them has dealt with it. And it touches everybody. I mean, it's usually 1 or 2 degrees of separation between knowing somebody that has a mental illness and has dealt suicide attempts and being suicidal. It touches everybody in
Hmm.
some way.
Well, you talk about, let's touch on the statistics on about suicide. I talk about this in my book too. I do I do a chapter. I talk about suicide and statistics, and I have a story about a patient of mine who, her struggles and eventual suicide. But yeah, so what are the statistics to really people need to know about?
Um, so I think, you know, first of all, the highest risk groups. So, and a really high risk group is men about my age in their 50s
Hmm.
tend to be a really high risk group. Another statistic that people find interesting is that women attempt suicide more than men,
Right.
uh, 3 to 4 times more often, but men die more often, about 3 to 4 times more often and the reason is because men are more likely to use a gun than women are.
And
And
like to use a gun and to hang themselves.
yeah,
Those are the two.
they, they
And
men tend to use more lethal methods.
right. And then
Um,
women more likely are going to try overdosing or cutting,
yeah,
and usually when you cut, you're going to, unless you cut deep, you're going to still be saved. But yeah, but you're right on that. That's exactly correct. And, it's a lot in teenagers, but the elderly, yes. And it's a sickly elderly or someone's diagnosed with cancer and doesn't want to go through the treatment and just decides I just don't want to go through this anymore. I'm going to die with
well,
cancer
you
now.
mentioned young people, although young people's risk of dying isn't, obviously because they're young and healthy, but suicide is like second or third, depending on the statistics, like accidents. I think homicides, accidents are one and two, and then suicides three, I think are the top three. Suicide had moved up to number two at some point, but it's in the top two or three for young people.
Is that
And
number two
I think,
after accidents? Accidents is number one, and number two is suicide.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So, and then it's very high amongst veterans. We lose almost a veteran every hour, every day, or veterans and current members of the military. And so,
yeah.
I was, uh, I'm still optimistic because I'm not anti-gun. I don't own a gun. I've never shot a gun, but I'm not being anti-gun in the United States is a waste of time anyway.
Right.
But what I tell people is I was hoping that,
Like you said in the book, there's more guns than people in the United States.
yeah, yeah. But whenever people were kind of offended, some of these mass shootings that they were blaming it on mental illness, and I was like, no, I was like, I hope they do blame it on mental illness because we can use that because there's about 45 to 50,000 gun deaths in the US, and about 55% of those are suicides. I said, so let's focus on mental illness and gun restrictions. We should totally be doing that. Even if it isn't accurate with mass shooters, I'm perfectly okay with somebody like me not being able to own a gun. I should not own a gun. Fortunately, I know that. But if I did own a gun, I probably would not be alive today. And so, I think that people understanding that could help reduce the suicide risk for people.
But also, a lot of these, the mass shootings, one thing, but with the school shootings, these kids who are not in the age to own a gun, they should not have any access to a gun, and so that's on the parents or whoever allowed that kid to find a gun where they shouldn't. So there's something else going on there, and of course, the shooter has mental illness. There's no question about that. Obviously, they're at least a sociopath. We know that,
Well,
but
and I think a lot of times those people are going in. The whole confrontation is they know the police are going to kill them. It's a suicide mission. Um, I mean, so the research that I talked a little bit about these statistics was in my research for African American students in my dissertation. One of the things I learned was there's evidence that a lot of young Black males who we talk about, in inner cities, being involved in gangs and so forth, that their deaths may be suicides because they're just living a very dangerous, erratic lifestyle, knowing that they're going to do that and they're hoping that they're just going to die at some point,
Mm,
living the lifestyle that they're living. A lot of people call it die by cops, and you get into a confrontation knowing that the police are going to kill you, and that's a suicide.
mhm. Well, I mean, some of them also, the shooters, some of them just want to be famous. They want their name out there. They want to be known for, so some of them are, I think, don't have, with my research, some of them don't think they're going to be, they're going to be killed. The story I have in my book about a school shooter, he basically gives up. He gives up and surrenders because he wants to be known,
Real,
and he wants to be known and be famous for something. And
yeah.
so yeah, so obviously very, very sick people. But some of those school shooters there's warning signs. They usually post things on social media. And they're usually bullied at school, and they a lot of revenge. They want revenge. But yeah, but there is ways of knowing and seeing those warning signs about some of these troubled kids too. Um, Anything else you'd like to share? There's a lot. I mean, a lot in your book that's so great. And anything else you'd like to talk about?
I I think we've covered everything.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you having me on your show, and letting me talk about this book. It's been a passion of mine for the last couple of years.
Going back to, so you were from Illinois originally?
Yes, I was born and raised in Illinois. I live in St. Louis now, but that's right on I'm 90 minutes from my hometown where my mom still
Yeah.
lives, and family, and so I'm just an hour and a half drive away
Yeah.
from home.
My daughter went to college 4 years at Loyola Chicago. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, so she
we're
got
a little further south from her.
with that.
I said we're a little further south
Also, yeah,
from.
she was a California girl. She said so the winters were a little tough, but she loved the experience of
Oh, it's the Windy City for a reason.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
she said I can explain. Yeah, she knows exactly why it's called that after living there for 4 years. But and she's glad to be back in California, that's for sure. But she had a great experience there. Um, well, I encourage everybody to. So is it available on Amazon?
So it's available on Amazon. It's available on, I think, Walmart.com, on Target. You can even get it at the publisher, wordsmatterpublishing.com. You can get it directly from them, any of those. And I encourage people. I mean, obviously, I want to sell books, but I didn't do this to make money. I did it to help people, and I wanted it to be a book that people that like yourself, professionals could recommend to somebody, and it's only, I think it's $15, so it's not expensive.
Mhm.
It's a very easy read, and I think I even put my email address in the book so that if anybody ever wanted to, I've had a few people that have read it who have emailed me, and if nothing else to say thanks or ask me a question, because I want to, my being an educator, I think my motivation is helping people. I love doing that more than anything. And so, if I do tell people that I hope I help more than one person with
Yeah,
this book, but
yeah.
I want to help millions. But, you know, I appreciate you having me on your show and talking to.
Shout out before we close. Shout out to Tammy Corwin, who
Yeah,
introduced us because Tammy, I
yeah,
do my TV show through Tammy, and she sent me your information. And by the way, here's the book right here for people. It's just called Just Live. Simply Take the Next Breath. I'm an avid reader, and I have to say, this book really moved me, and it was just very well written, very well researched, and so I highly recommend it. And I know Tammy is the one who published it too, isn't she?
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
But yeah, but I thank you for coming on. It's a really important subject. I'm glad we've touched on it a little bit in the show here and there with certain patients I've seen, but I think we haven't really gotten in depth with it like I have with you. And I'm really glad because it's the most important topic in psychiatry by far, is suicide prevention. And then with what I do as my job, I'm constantly thinking about. Thankfully, with me, and I have a really good track record because it's just a matter of really keeping communication with people, and like I said, and understanding. that you can't reason with suicide. When you try to, reason with it and make sense of it, it doesn't always make sense. Uh,
Yeah.
and but it's you have to really think about how that person is feeling, that to take that step, how much pain that person's in, and how much and really feel for that person, and try to help that person like you're trying to do. So, but yeah, I'm so happy to have you on. By the way, I mailed you my book, my latest book, The Corona
Yeah, I'm
Purge.
looking forward to it.
So
I need some side reading.
did you get it already, or you should be getting it
I
in
haven't
advance?
gotten it yet, but I'm looking for it.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Morris, for coming on. I really appreciate it. So, we'll talk. We'll talk. Hopefully, we'll talk again soon.
Yep. Thank you.
Take care.